Good morning, good morning, good morning. So today we're going to be talking about factoring these quadratic equations one more time. These are things that are going to be asked on the STAR question. I know there's been a few questions on every STAR for the past 6 years, and so I'm trying to increase your chances of finding the right answer and getting a good score on it, okay? So to get started, again, the quadratic is going to look something like x squared plus 2x minus 3. And that's going to be an expression because it does not have an equal sign. When we factor, our goal is to find two sets of parentheses that would multiply together to make that quadratic. That starts by labeling A, by labeling B, and by labeling C on each of these letters, and being able to say that A is going to be the invisible 1 in front of the X, B is going to be the 2 that's in front of the X, and C is going to be that negative 3 right here. From there, we can substitute in. So in this case, A becomes 1, 1, and then again 1 here. C is going to be my negative 3, and B is going to be my 2. My goal then is to multiply A times C, which is 1 times negative 3, which is negative 3. That negative 3 is going to be something that I'm going to need to factor. Don't forget, when you have negatives like that, it could be negative 1 times 3 or 3 times negative, not 3 times negative 1, 1 times negative 3. Okay, so it is something to be careful when we're looking at that to make sure that we're choosing the right set of factors, and especially when we have, notice, one negative sign, one minus sign, and one plus sign, that there are going to be some minuses involved. We have to figure out where those negatives go. In this case, when I'm looking for two numbers, I'm trying to find two that add up to a positive 2, and that would be this 3 and that minus 1. So when I put that minus 1 and that 3 here, that's going to help us set up our factor, because we're going to have that 1 in front of our x. It's going to be invisible when we write it, but then that minus 1 goes after. The bottom number will always go in front of the x. The top number is always going to be after. Same thing on the other side. The 1 is always going to go in front of that x here, and that is going to be an invisible 1 because it is going to not be need to be seen on it, just like the 1 here was invisible. Okay, and then our answer here is going to be basically that. It's just going to be x minus 1 and x plus 3, and those are going to be my factors. Now let's go ahead and work our way down the page where we've actually got some examples here. And once again, we're going to do some factorization. We're going to start with our x-men. We're going to start with our A. We're going to go to our B, and we're going to finish with our C here. A is going to be the invisible 1 that we have in front right here. So I got 1 times the 10 that's right here. As I finish filling this in, I want to make sure I keep putting the over 1 on each side here, and then I have my B on the bottom. Okay. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply 1 times 10, which is 10, which I then factor into 1 and 10 and 2 and 5. Since I have nothing but positives, plus and plus, that means that both of these numbers are positive. So I need to find two numbers that add together to make 7. And for that, I do see 2 and 5. So I've got a positive 2 and a positive 5, which turns into the invisible 1 in front of the x plus the 2 that's on top. And then I've got, again, my invisible 1 in front of my x plus 5 because of that 5 that's on top. And that will always be the top one going after the x. I go on a little bit further where I've got some that actually has some minuses here. That means some of my factors are going to end up being negative. So I've still got my A, B, C. My A is going to be that invisible 1. My B is going to be that negative 1 there, and then my C is going to be my negative 20. So I've got my 1, and I multiply it by negative 20, and then I've also got my negative 1, at the bottom. Don't forget, I've still got this over 1 and this over 1. 1 times 20 is going to, negative 20 is going to be negative 20, so I'm looking for some factors there. That'll be like 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 3 doesn't work, 4 and 5. But don't forget about the opposites as well. When I say opposites, I mean we're going to have some negatives in here. Since they're both negative, I can say we're going to have one number that is negative, and that is going to be because this number here happens when you multiply two numbers together, and if both of those numbers are negative, then that would have been a plus sign. In this case, though, since they're both negative, I can say, okay, one of them is negative, one of them is positive. And since I know like 1 minus 20 is negative 19, it's like, okay, the bigger number has to be the negative one. So I got to find two numbers that subtract to make negative 1. 1 minus 20 is negative 19. 2 minus 10 is negative 8. And then 4 minus 5 is negative 1, meaning that these, the 4 and the negative 5, are going to be my factors. I've seen some people as well do negative 1 and 20, negative 2 and 20, and negative 4 and 5, and then turn around and just do 1 and negative 20, 2 and negative 10, and 4 and negative 5, and say, okay, I know that it's that one. Whichever way you choose to do it is fine. It's just a matter of making sure that you have the negatives in the right spot. Okay, so let's go ahead and move forward on this. All right, set up my parentheses, and the number that's in the bottom of the fraction is going to go in front of the x. So in both cases, they're invisible ones, so I know that these are going to be x's. The 4 on the left side is positive, so it's going to be x plus 4. I apologize for the slight mistake when I added the plus on the right side, because when I look really closely at it, that 5 is negative, and that means that I'm going to have a minus 5 over here. Again, the top goes after the x. Okay, that is going to be my factorization of this. On the next one, it gets a little more difficult because a is not going to be less than, or it's not going to be 1, it's going to be more than 1. My a being 2 turns into me having to multiply a little bit more, and also it turns into some fraction manipulation that we're going to have to do. We may end up having to reduce. It's not a guarantee, but it's a chance. So let's take a look at it. Notice I'm putting 2 on top over there, starting with the multiplication already. I've also got those fractions on the side set up with the a's on the bottom of them. And then I've also got now my multiplication of my c going alongside it and my b written on the bottom. That means that we're going to start this process. 2 times 4 happens to be 8. 8's only got a couple of factors, 1 and 8, 2 and 4. Okay, since these are both positive, I know that both of these numbers are going to end up being positive, so I need two numbers that add together to make 9, which is going to be 1 and 8. 1 over 2 and 8 over 2. Hang on a second. 8 over 2 can reduce. If I divide both by 2, I get 4 over 1, and that is going to be a slightly reduced fraction. And I do have to pay attention to that, okay? That 2 that's on the bottom goes in front of my x, plus that 1 that's on top goes after my x, okay? The other fraction does kind of the same thing, but this time there's a 1 on the bottom now. Remember, we divided, now there's a 1. So I've got that 1 in front of the x, and then I've got that with a 4 on top of it that we are adding, and this is going to be my factor. One more to do. All right, this one, again, is going to be a little bit more difficult because a is larger than 1. A is going to be 3 here. That puts B as 23 and C as 30. When I set up my X-Men, it's going to take a second for us to multiply because 90 has a lots of factors. All right, so let's talk about what those factors are going to look like, okay? Notice I'm still starting with my 3 times on the top. I'm still going to be putting my times 30, and then I'm going to have on the bottom my 23. All right, so let's talk about 3 times 30. I've got 2 positive numbers, so I know that my factor is going to be positive, which makes it really nice. 3 times 30 is 90. If I start factoring 90 off, I have 1 and 90. I've got 2 and 45. I've got 3, 30. 4 doesn't work. 5 works with 18. 6 works with 15. Then I got 7 doesn't work, 8 doesn't work, 9 doesn't work, 10, oh yeah, well 9 does work, 9 and 10. Okay, so when I look at this, I'm looking for 2 numbers that add together to make 23, and in this case, I see 5 and 18 that add together to make 23. So I put my 5 and my 18. 18 over 3 is going to be something that we can pretty easily reduce. If we divide both of them by 3, we get 6 over 1. That turns into the fraction that I'm going to use instead of 18 and 3. So let's go ahead and start this. 3 goes in front of x because the bottom of the fraction goes in front of the x plus the top, which is 5. That's my first one. The second one, the invisible 1, goes in front of my x over here. So I don't need a 1 there. And then I do have a positive 6 over here, and so I put the plus 6 and I close the parentheses, and these are the two fractions, or the two parentheses that we need to make it. If I can get y'all to go ahead and complete that worksheet, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.